Good evening. Welcome to the next reading. Today's reading is a story by title His Chance in Life. This is in the series collections Plain Tales from the Hills, collections by Rudyard Kipling. Now, all these stories, as we have mentioned earlier, these relate to a period around 150 years, within 150 to 200 years before today, in the old colonial India, where Britain was the colonial masters and India was the colony. So the Indians were the slaves or the servants, and the Englishman, the white man, was the masters. So here we go. His chance in life. Now, all this is written by Rudyard Kipling. He gives the Englishman's view or understanding of the situation, the people, and etc., the behavior. And the Englishmen knew very little about India and its background because they came as conquerors and colonialists who wanted to take control and to rape and plunder the country. And they had no interest in the local people. So we start with this story. If you go straight away from levies and government house lists, past trades balls, far beyond everything and everybody you ever knew in your respectable life, you cross in time the borderline where the last drop of white blood ends and the full tide of black sets in. It would be easier to talk to a new-made duchess on the spur of the moment than to the borderline folk without violating some of their conventions or hurting their feelings. So, this name from levies and government house list, past trades balls, etc. These are probably locations in a particular spot. Usually these would be in some hill station in India, high in the Himalayas. I don't know where this one is. So if you do that, then you cross in time the borderline where the last drop of white blood ends and the full tide of black sets in. So from up to then there is a white and then there is only black. Black is the local population. It would be easier to talk to a new-made duchess on the spur of the moment. So a newly titled duchess would be much more possessive of the title and what it means and the dignity and everything than an old timer. It would be far easier to talk to a new made duchess on the spur of the moment than to the borderline folk without violating some of their conventions or hurting their feelings. So the borderline folk are between the black and the white. So they are very touchy, and so if you talk to them, you are likely to offend them because the sensibilities, their self-importance in their own mind would be so great that they will get offended. So you can't speak to somebody on the spur of the moment. You need somebody of high standing to introduce you to the Duchess and for the Duchess to greet you and for you to courtesy and beg and show her that you are a servant and all that. Then you talk in the appropriate madam, sir, and all that thing. Then only they like it. The black and the white mix very quaintly in their ways. Sometimes the white shows in spurts of fierce childish pride, which is pride of race run crooked, and sometimes the black in still fiercer abasement and humility, half heathenish customs and strange, unaccountable impulses in crime. So there it brings out the black and the white. The white people are the people where, as it says, mm, the black and the white mix very quaintly in their ways. It's not just a one-to-one meeting or mixing. They very quaintly. Sometimes the white shows in spurts of fierce childish pride. So the white has got pride, which sometimes they show in a fierce and childish manner, which is the pride of race run crooked. So they are proud that they are English, white skinned, and that pride runs crooked in their head. And sometimes the black are the lower people, the local, and they are held in low esteem. The black in still fierce abasement and humility. So the black are abased and they accept it and they behave in a very abased manner, half heathenish customs and strange. So they, with their half heathenish custom, the local customs appear very strange to the white man. So the Englishmen look down upon the Indians, and if they have any particular customs and celebrations, they were derided, they were made fun of, and made to feel ashamed of their customs. So the black and the white mix very quaintly in their ways. Sometimes the white shows in spurts of fierce childish pride, and the white was very proud. They would show it in fierce manner, in childish manner, and sometimes the black would show in a still more fierce abasement and humility, half heathenish customs, and strange, unaccountable impulses to crime. So that's how they were painted with the brush of heathenish, strange ways, customs, and crime. So anything which the black does is looked with suspicion, tinted glass of crime. One of these days, these people understand they are far lower than the class whence Derozio, the man who imitated Byron, sprung. Derozio is a name of a writer. I don't know him, so let's take him as X. Derozio. So one of these days, these people understand they are far lower than the class whence Derozio sprung. So these people will turn out a writer or a poet, and then we shall know how they live and what they feel. In the meantime, any stories about them cannot be absolutely correct in fact or inference. So that is the prejudice. Means before knowing anything, they have judged the black people, the local people, that they cannot produce Byron. Byron is one of the great poets of the English language, and he has written poetry. But these people, Englishmen, never knew any poetry of the local people because they were ignorant, pompous, and stupid. In the meantime, any stories about them cannot be absolutely correct in fact or inference. Miss Verzies came from across the borderline to look after some children who belonged to a lady until a regularly ordained nurse could come out. So there is a lady, and she had some children who needed looking after. So this lady had uh, asked for a nurse, regularly ordained nurse, but that regular nurse from a hospital or nursing home would take a little time to come. So in the interval, in the gap of time, this Miss Visit came from across the borderline to look after the children of the lady. The lady said Miss Visit was a bad, dirty nurse and inattentive. It never struck her that Miss Visit had her own life to lead and her own affairs to worry over, or that these affairs were the most important things in the world to Miss Visit. Very few mistresses admit this sort of reasoning. Miss Visit was as black as a boot, and to our standard of taste, hideously ugly. She wore cotton print gowns and bulgy shoes. And when she lost her temper with the children, she abused them in the language of the borderline, which is part English, part Portuguese, and part native. She was not attractive, but she had her pride, and she preferred being called Miss Visit. Now that sums up the prejudice of the English against the native people. So this one girl was brought over from across the borderline to take care of these children, and this lady, she said that Miss Visit was a bad, dirty nurse and inattentive. It never struck her that Miss Visit had her own life to live and her own affairs to matter, and that these affairs were the most important things for Miss Visit. Very few mistresses admit this aspect. And further to that, the personal details. Miss Visit was as black as a boot, whereas the lady, etc., were white. They were English. They were white. And this Miss Visit was a girl, local girl, native girl. She was as black as a boot. And to our standard of taste, according to their level of taste, this girl was hideously ugly, very ugly. She wore cotton print from gowns. So that was another thing. She would wear cotton print gowns, not the elegant whatever was being worn by the English women. And when this Miss Wesley's lost her temper with the children, she would abuse them in the language of the borderline, which is part English, part Portuguese, and part native. She was not attractive, but she had her pride, and she preferred being called Miss Visit. There you have the setting. The white, pompous, very proud, and because they are the rulers, and on the other side, the natives, the dark black people who were the oppressed and the people who of the land. Every Sunday, Miss Visit dressed herself wonderfully and went to see her mamma, who lived for the most part on an old cane chair in a greasy tussar silk dressing gown and a big rabbit warren of a house full of Vizises, Pereiras, and Ribeiras, and Lisbons, and Gonçalveses, and a floating population of loafers. Besides fragments of the day's market, garlic, stale incense, clothes thrown on the floor, petticoats hung on strings for screens, old bottles, pewter crucifixes, dried immortals, pariah puppies, plaster images of the Virgin, and hats without crowns. Miss Vezzis drew 20 rupees a month for acting as a nurse, and she squabbled weekly with her mama as to the percentage to be given towards housekeeping. Okay, so this Miss Vezzis and her background is described here. Every Sunday, Miss Vezzis dressed herself wonderfully and went to see her mama. Her mama lived for mostly she lived in an old cane chair. She'd be sitting in that cane chair all the time. In a greasy tussar silk dressing gown. And she's always dressed in that same dressing gown, which is made of tussar silk, which is a high quality silk. But maybe they don't know that. A tussar silk dressing gown and a big rabbit warren of a house. And this mama's house is compared to a rabbit warren, which means it is so crowded and full of little rabbits. A rabbit warren of a house, and this house was full of Vezises, Pereiras, Riberas, Lisboas, and Gonzalveses, the various names of the local people who used to live there, all the children, and the house was full of these children. And a floating population of loafers, besides fragments. So loafers would be there, they'll come, they'll sit, they'll get something to eat and they'll go and all that. They are always there, hanging around. And besides, fragments of the day's market. The family would have gone to market, bought something, and some pieces, cut pieces of vegetables or meat or something would be lying around. Garlic, stale incense, clothes thrown on the floor, petticoats hung on screen. So the typical appearance of a third-rate shanty house. The cloth stretched on a string to provide a curtain, privacy. As a screen. Old bottles, pewter crucifixes, dried immortals. So something of whichever maybe some plant or something which are dried, and so that they don't, because it can be kept for a long time as a decoration. Pariah puppies, plaster images of the Virgin. So these people are Christians. They're obviously from Goa, this Gonzalves and Pereira and Ribera and all that. So they had pewter images of the Virgin and hats without crowns. Miss Vezzis drew 20, her salary was 20 rupees a month for acting as nurse. And she squabbled weekly with her mama. She had to give part of this money to her mama for the housekeeping. And the mama will ask for more money, and she would argue about it, and they would squabble about it. When the quarrel was over, Michel de Cruz used to shamble across the low mud wall of the compound and make love to Miss Vezzis after the fashion of the borderline, which is hedged about with much ceremony. So when the quarrel was over, this Michel de Cruz, he would then shamble across the low mud wall of the compound and make love to Miss Vezzis after the fashion of and that was the way of life, which is hedged about with much such ceremony. Michel was a poor, quickly sickly weed and very black, but he had his pride. So this Michel who came to make love to Vesis was a poor and sickly man, and he was a weed, means he was just a dried up guy. He was very black, but he had his pride. He would not be seen smoking a hookah or anything, and he looked down on the natives as only a man with 7/8 native blood in his veins can. So this uh, Michel Decros thought himself to be very high, and as if he was as good as the white man, and he used to look down upon the natives. Huh? He looked down on the natives as only a man who was as black as he was could look down upon the local people. The Vezzis family had their pride too. They traced their descent from a mythical plate layer who had worked on the Soane Bridge when railways were new in India, and they valued their English origin. So this Vezzis family uh, were descended from a family who had worked as plate layers at the construction of the Soane Bridge. Soane is a river's name. Bridge when railways were being built. That was during the earlier generation. And they valued their English origin. Michel was a telegraph signaller. The man was a telegraph signaller on 35 rupees a month. And how much was this girl getting? Let me find out. She would get 20 rupees a month. And the signaller, Michel, was getting 35 rupees a month. The fact that he was in government employed made Mrs. Vezzis lenient to the shortcomings of his ancestors. So since he was an employee of the government, he was a telegraph signaller with the government of India. The mama thought that it is all right, he is good. There was a compromising legend. Dom Anna the tailor brought it from Punani. Oh, so Don Anna the tailor brought a legend from Punani. That is another town that a black Jew of Cochin had once married into the Decros family. So in Cochin there were Jews, and the black Jew of Cochin had once married into the Decros family. While it was an open secret that an uncle of Mrs. Decros was, at that very time, doing menial work connected with cooking for a club in southern India. He sent Mrs. Decros 7 rupees 8 annas a month. But she felt the disgrace to the family very keenly all the same. So this is how the connection starts. They are explained. Now Mrs. Decros, that is this girl's mother, Mrs. Decros. What is her name? Miss Vezzis. Mother is Mama is Mrs. Decros. Now Mrs. Decros, there was a legend that one black Jew from Cochin was once married into the Decros family, while it was an open secret that an uncle of Mrs. Decros was at that very time doing menial work connected with cooking for a club in southern India. So this mama, Mrs. Decruz's uncle, was working as a cook in a club in southern India. And he got a salary from there, from out of which 7 rupees and 8 annas every month he would send to Mrs. D. Cruz. But she felt the disgrace to the family very keenly all the same. She would happily receive the money, but she felt it a disgrace that her uncle was employed in a club as a cook. However, so you see how the interconnection and the social layouts lie. However, in the course of a few Sundays, Mrs. Vezis brought herself to overlook these blemishes. So Mrs. Vezis then said, "Oh, that's okay, that's all right, that's all right." So everything was overlooked and gave her consent to the marriage of her daughter with Michel. So she agreed that her daughter, Miss Vezis, can get married to Michel. Michel is that man who would come in the night to make love to her. So she agreed, she gave her consent to the marriage of her daughter with Michel on condition that Michel should have at least 50 rupees a month to start married life upon. So this mother of Miss Vezis said, okay, my daughter can get married to this Michel, but he must be earning at least 50 rupees every month. So to have a married life with my daughter. This wonderful prudence must have been a lingering touch of the mythical plate layer's Yorkshire blood. For across the borderline, people take a pride in marrying when they please, not when they can. So this family, its background was that they were part of the team that were plate layers when the bridge across the Swan River was being built during the last generation. So they had certain Yorkshire plate layers blood, from which they had the prudence, and so it is that the mother, Mrs. Vezis, had insisted that her daughter can marry Michel only if Michel can have a 50 rupee per month salary. So, having regard to his departmental prospects, Mrs. Vezis might as well have asked Michel to go away and come back with the moon in his pocket. So, having regard to his departmental prospects, this is not telling it directly, but in a very euphemistic, roundabout manner. Michel was working as a, what's that, telegraph clerk or something. And in his department, for him to earn 50 rupees a month was not imaginable. So, having regard to his departmental prospects, Mrs. Vezis might as well have asked Michel to go away and to come back with the moon in his pocket. But Michel was deeply in love with Miss Vezis, and that helped him to endure. He accompanied Miss Vezis to Mass one Sunday, and after Mass means they went to church Sundays. On that Sunday, he went with her, and after Mass, walking home through the hot, stale dust with her hand in his, he swore by several saints whose names would not interest you. He swore that he would never forget Miss Vezis, and she swore by her honor. And the saints, the oath runs rather curiously. In nominis sanctimonos, whatever the name of the saint is, and so forth, ending with a kiss on the forehead, a kiss on the left cheek, and a kiss on the mouth, never to forget Michel. So they both swore that they would be true to each other. Next week, Michelle was transferred, and Miss Vezis dropped tears upon the window sash of the intermediate compartment as he left the station. So Michelle was transferred next week, and he had to go away. This is all part of the imperial government. The entire colony and the whole world, they had the colonies, and an employee could be transferred from any one spot to any other spot in the empire. So he was transferred, and he left, and she wept. If you look at the telegraph map of India, you will see a long line skirting the coast from Bakarganj to Madras. Michelle was ordered to Tibasu, a little sub-office one-third down this line, to send messages on from Behrampur to Chikakola, and to think of Miss Vezis and his chances of getting 50 rupees a month out of office hours. So, Michelle was transferred to a place called Tibasu, a little small sub-office, one-third down the line from this Bakarganj to Madras. So, in that, it goes south from there. So, one-third of the distance, and then there's a small office there, and he was to be put there. And from a big office to a small office, chances of his earning more are zero. So, so here the noise of the Bay of Bengal and Bengali Babu for company. So his boss was a Bengali Babu who would scold him and shout, and he had the Bay of Bengal near his office. So that noise was incessant, nothing more. He sent foolish letters with crosses tucked inside the flaps of the envelopes to Miss Vezis. So he would send foolish letters to Miss Vezis. When he had been at Tibasu for nearly 3 weeks, his chance came. So after 3 weeks, he got a chance. What's that? Never forget that unless the outward and visible signs of our authority are always before a native, he is as incapable as a child of understanding what authority means. So this Englishman speaking, that our authority should be always held out in front of the native. Native, any Indian is a native. So he always that the like a schoolmaster having a switch to cane the child, it should be switching in front of the eye always. Never forget that unless the outward and visible signs of our authority are always before a native, so it will be swishing your cane in front of the eye of the native always. Otherwise, he is incapable as a child of understanding what authority means or where is the danger of disobeying it. Tibasu was a forgotten little place with a few Orissa mohammedans in it. So, it was in Orissa, it was a very tiny, forgotten place, and there were a few Muslims in it. These, hearing nothing of the collector Sahib for some time, and heartily despising the Hindu sub-judge, arranged to start a little Mohram riot of their own. But the Hindus turned out and broke their heads. When finding lawlessness pleasant, Hindus and Mohammedans together raised an aimless sort of Donnybrook, just to see how far they could go. They looted each other's shops and paid off private grudges in the regular way. It was a nasty little riot, but not worth putting in the newspapers. So this happens as in those days, this happened, as it happens today, that so since the collector sahib's name was not mentioned for some time, these people, the Muhammadans and the Hindus of this particular place, uh, Tibasu, they rioted and fought each other during the Muharram, and they looted each other's shops and everything, and it was all a very bad scene. Michel was working in his office when he heard the sound that a man never forgets all his life, the ah of an angry crowd. When that sound drops about three tones and changes to a thick droning ut, the man who hears it had better go away if he is alone. The native police inspector ran in and told Michel that the town was in an uproar and coming to wreck the telegraph office. The Babu put on his cap and quietly dropped out of the window while the police inspector, afraid but obeying the old race instinct, which recognizes a drop of white blood as far as it can be diluted, said, "What orders does the Sahib give?" The Sahib decided Michel, though horribly frightened, he felt that he felt that for the hour he, the man with the Cochin Jew and the menial uncle in his pedigree, was the only representative of English authority in the place. So the policeman looked at the Michel and addressed him as the Sahib. He says the crowd is coming, they'll destroy everything. What is the order the Sahib is giving? Then Michel realized that he is the Sahib and he has to decide. Then he thought of Miss Vezis and the 50 rupees and took the situation on himself. Then he took hold of the situation. There were 7 native policemen in Tibasu and 4 crazy smooth-bore muskets among them. All the men were grey with fear, but not beyond leading. Michel dropped the key of the telegraph instrument and went out at the head of his army to meet the mob. As the shouting crew came around the corner of the road, he dropped and fired. The men behind him losing off instinctively at the same time. The whole crowd, cursed to the backbone, yelled and ran, leaving one man dead and another dying on the road. Michel was sweating with fear, but he kept his weakness under and went down into the town, past the house where the sub-judge had barricaded himself. The sub-judge had barricaded himself in his house, and this Michel went past his house. The streets chasing after the mob. The streets were empty. Tibasu was more frightened than Michel, for the mob had been taken at the right time. So Michel and his 4 muskets had won the day. Michel returned to the telegraph office and sent a message to Chicacola asking for help. Before an answer came, he received a deputation of the elders of Tibasu, telling him that the sub-judge and his actions generally were unconstitutional, and trying to bully him. So there was a deputation of elders. They said, "What? No, you can't do like this. It's not. This is improper and unconstitutional." But the heart of Michel de Cruz was big and white in his breast because of his love for Miss Vezis, the nurse girl, and because he had tasted for the first time responsibility and success. These two make an intoxicating drink and have ruined more men than ever has whiskey. Michel answered that the subject might say what he pleased, but until the assistant collector came, he, the telegraph signaller, was the government of India in Tibasu, and elders of the town would be held accountable for further writing. So Michel said, until the sub collectors came, I am the government of India here in Tibasu, and what I say is the law. Then they bowed their heads and said, show mercy, or words to that effect, and went back in great fear, each accusing the other of having begun the rioting. Early in the dawn, after a night's patrol with his 7 policemen, Michel went down the road, musket in hand, to meet the assistant collector who had ridden in to quell Tibasu. But in the presence of this young Englishman, Michel felt himself slipping back more and more into the native, and the tale of the Tibasu riots ended with the strain on the teller in an hysterical outburst of tears, bred by sorrow that he had killed a man, shame that he could not feel as uplifted as he had felt through the night, and childish anger that his tongue could not do justice to his great deeds. It was on quite dropped. It was a white drop in the Michel's veins dying out, though he did not know it. But the Englishman understood, and after he had schooled those men of Tibasu, and had conferred with the subjects till that excellent official turned green, he found time to draft an official letter describing the conduct of Michel, which letter filtered through the proper channels and ended in the transfer of Michel's up-country once more on the imperial salary of 66 rupees a month. So because of this, Michel got transferred to another bigger post at 66 rupees a month. So he and Miss Vezis were married with great state and ancientry. And now there are several little decruises sprawling about the verandas of the Central Telegraph Office. But if the whole revenue of the department he serves were to be his reward, Michel could never repeat what he did at Tibasu for the sake of Miss Vezis, the nurse girl, which proves that when a man does good work out of all proportion to his pay, in 7 cases out of 9, there is a woman at the back of the virtue. The 2 exceptions must have suffered from sunstroke. So that's the story of Miss Vezis and Michel. And because he did this very valorous deed, he got promoted and he got a higher salary of 66 rupees. And the condition was that until he earns 50 rupees a month, he cannot marry Miss Vezis. So since he got a salary more higher than 50, he was able to, and he got married to Miss Vezis, and then they had many children, and that is the end of the story. Thank you. I think it gives an idea of how the background of the plays, the people, and their relationships, their behavior. I think it is worthwhile reading it. Thank you.